Hi, it's Katrina. Number 10. The Battle of Jahi. After 3,000 years, the Bronze Age came to an explosive end with the bloody and violent battle between Pharaoh Ramses III of Egypt and the mysterious sea people of unknown origins. At the time, the Egyptians and the Hittites were some of the two last remaining powers. The third remaining power was one that didn't really have a home base. The Egyptians had the land of the Nile, while the Hittites ruled Anatolia. It appeared as though the sea people came from nowhere. Then they used surprise and tenacity to raid the coastal cities of the Mediterranean. They came with mighty force and crippled great kingdoms by destroying their seaside towns. It was such a disaster that they brought the destruction of the Bronze Age and a massive shift in civilization. The beginning of the end was 1180 BC. The Hittite Empire was in the throes of a terrible famine, experiencing social unrest, and there were issues with the royal line. That was when the Sea People struck against them. But after they brought the Hittite Empire down, they found themselves facing the same problem as the Hittites were having. They had no food and their people were dying. So the Sea People set sail for Egypt to steal their food and their land. The Sea People knew the only way they could take Egypt by force was if they split up into two different parties. They would attack from the land and the sea at the same time, using a Pincer Maneuver. But Ramses III saw it coming from a mile away and devised a plan to meet them twice in battle. He brought his army to preemptively strike, crushing the Sea People at the Battle of Jahi. Then he turned his army around and met the other party for the Great Battle of the Delta. He won both, crushing the Sea People and putting an end to their reign of terror. However, the Sea People had already done too much damage for it to be repaired. They had spent years pillaging the coastline of the Mediterranean at a time when most of Europe was struggling with a serious drought. They helped defeat the Hittite Empire, the Mycenaean civilization, the Kingdom of Al-Ashiyah, and the Ugarit. And that's only to name a few. Number 9. The Battle of Red Cliffs. In the year 208 AD, the Battle of Red Cliffs was fought between the warlord Cao Cao and military commander Liu Bei. It was a defining battle in ancient Chinese history, pitting two of China's most legendary warriors against each other. At this period in time, China was divided by bloodthirsty warlords who each controlled a small region and fought against their neighbors. This had been going on for centuries, even thousands of years. All through the Han Dynasty, China was segregated by warlord clans, but nearing the end, the power had been divided mostly in half. Cao Cao had the brute strength of northern China behind him, while Liu Bei boasted armies from the south. In a way, the fight was north versus south. It was a massive and bloody conflict, and the Southern Coalition smashed Cao Cao and ended his lifelong pursuit of joining China under one rule, his own, of course. With the Battle of Red Cliffs finished, the Han Dynasty came to an end, and with most of the northern forces either dispersed or destroyed, Liu Bei was at an excellent advantage to try and unify China under his dominion. He worked to stabilize the country, but then it was split into three separate kingdoms. Cao Cao was beaten but not killed, and he went on to rule the small kingdom of Cao Wei. Liu Bei reigned over Shu Han, and a third man, Sun Quan, ruled eastern Wu. This was the Three Kingdoms period, which only lasted for a brief time until 280 AD, and that was when all three kingdoms were united under the Jin Dynasty. Number 8. The Battle of Hastings. The Battle of Hastings was fought on October 14, 1066. King Harold II of England found himself on the losing end of history, as the Norman forces of William the Conqueror smashed his own, killed Harold, and proclaimed himself the King of Britain. This was a tremendous turning point in British history, because it saw the death of the very last Anglo-Saxon king, and the rise of the first Norman king. For a bit of background, William the Conqueror was Duke of Normandy. His blood could be traced all the way back to the Vikings. He was a direct relation to the Viking raider Rollo, who pillaged France in the 9th century and was given land and titles in Normandy. Normandy was in fact named after the Norsemen of whom the land was given. Years before the battle took place in 1051, William visited England and met his cousin, the English king Edward the Confessor. Edward had no children, and he promised to make William his heir. But after Edward died, the kingdom was handed over to Harold. This angered William, and he invaded England from France because he believed the throne was lawfully his. William's desire for the throne won him the battle, and he soon marched on London and beat the city into submission. Within just weeks of arriving on English soil, William the Conqueror became the first Norman king of England, and Europe was forever changed. So was England, who soon after began speaking French as their national language. Number 7. The Battle of Plataea. The Battle of Plataea was fought between the Greeks and the Persians in the year 479 BC. The previous year, the Greeks and Persians had gotten into a vicious naval battle that saw the Greeks come out on top. Xerxes I, ruler of Persia, had been decimated by the highly trained Greek hoplite warriors and their superior naval skills. The Greeks would once more defeat the Persians at the Battle of Plataea, ushering in an immense period of wealth, prosperity, and flourishing Western culture. This was an extremely important battle because of what was happening in the years before. Starting in the 5th century BC, Darius I of Persia expanded his territory into mainland Europe. He wiped out Thrace and Macedonia, and his next target was the Greeks. The Greeks were a thorn in the side of just about every civilization that had ever risen up in the area. They were undefeatable, but Darius needed them out of his way if he was to expand through Europe and rule the world. In 490 BC, the Greeks met the Persians at the Battle of Marathon. Persia was humiliated and sent home crying. Then, when Xerxes became king in 486 BC, he followed in his father's footsteps and once again tried to take Greece. He was stalled at the Battle of Thermopylae by the Spartans, but he did come out victorious. The Spartans gave the Greeks enough time to get their affairs in order, and by the time Xerxes continued his march, the Greeks were ready to wipe him out. Xerxes had the largest army the world had ever seen, with around 200,000 armed men involved in the fighting. A battle of that size wasn't seen again until Waterloo. With Greece as the victor, Persia was stopped dead in their tracks. And now for number 6. But first, wanted to say a big thank you to Narin, Zulfikar, and Noble Harvey. Thanks so much for watching and supporting this channel. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more amazing history. Number 6. The Battle of Milvian Bridge. The Battle of Milvian Bridge was fought between Roman Emperor Constantine and Roman Emperor Maxentius on October 28, 312. It was a major event in history because with Constantine's victory, he was propelled forward along the path that would place him as the sole emperor of Rome. And once he was the emperor, things changed for Europe dramatically. The Roman Empire was too big to manage. It was vast and emperors were springing up everywhere. Maxentius ruled North Africa and parts of Italy. Constantine, also known as Constantine the Great, was the official emperor. The forces of Constantine and Maxentius met at the Milvian Bridge, which crosses the Tiber River and leads directly into Rome. This proved to be a poor decision for Maxentius. Constantine made powerful initial advances. Maxentius tried to retreat and regroup, but his soldiers were choked by the bridge. They got clogged on the bridge, and Constantine's men cut them down easily. Part of the bridge also collapsed, stranding some groups of soldiers and sending others into the river where they drowned. Maxentius himself was thrown by his horse into the river and drowned before the battle was even over. Number 5. The Battle of Gaugamela. Over a century after the Greeks stopped the Persians from spreading any deeper into Europe, there was a great showdown between Macedon and the Persian army. The forces of Macedon were led by Alexander the Great, while the Persians were led by King Darius III. Unlike the first brawl between Europe and Persia, this one had devastating consequences for Persia. It was the final blow to the Achaemenid Empire, which had ruled Western Asia since 550 BC. The Achaemenid Empire was the largest empire in the world. It spanned millions of square miles, but it could never push past Greece's borders. The Battle of Gaugamela took place in 331 BC. The fighting happened on the outskirts of an old village in what is today Iraq. The Persians believed they would win since they outnumbered Alexander's army significantly. Most historians agree that the odds would have been enough to make most generals surrender or flee, but Alexander used superior tactics. giving him a decisive victory and leading to the complete collapse of Persia. With the Achaemenid Empire out of commission, Alexander was allowed to begin his conquest of the known world. Number 4. The Battle of Zhuolu. The Records of the Grand Historian is a long and complex history of China, a retelling of every major event throughout China's 24 dynasties. The book was written in the early 1st century BC by the historian Sima Qian. It's very near to the start of this record that the second major battle in Chinese history is detailed. It's called the Battle of Zhuolu, and it was one of the first important fights that earned itself a place in a history book. The battle was waged in the 26th century BC over 4,500 years ago. It was fought between the legendary Yellow Emperor and the Zhuli tribes of Qiyu. These two primitive and yet powerful armies came together along the plains of Zhuolu to fight over the fertile land of the Yellow River Valley. The Yellow Emperor won, and history was changed forever. The Yellow Emperor established the capital of what would soon become the agricultural confederacy of the Huaxia civilization, and from there, the civilization would evolve into the powerful Han Chinese nation. Number 3. The Battle of Agincourt. The Battle of Agincourt is one of the most famous in all of English history. The battle took place during the 100 Years' War between France and England. Henry V led his army into northern France after crossing the English Channel 2 months prior with 11,000 men. He laid siege to the city of Harfleur in Normandy. He took the town after 5 long weeks, but lost half of his men doing it. Half the army was already gone from disease and casualties. And even with only about 5,000 men left, Henry pushed his army northeast to Calais. But in his way stood an army of 20,000 French. They outnumbered the exhausted English over 4-1. On October 25, 1415, the English had no choice but to fight. The battle started at 11 o'clock in the morning, and the English stood their ground and let the French advance on them. As the French charged up the field to battle, they were bombarded by artillery and arrows. The English had highly advanced longbows and were able to rain down death on the charging French. Plus, the French cavalrymen couldn't reach the archers because they had protected themselves with a wall of pointed stakes. As more and more French poured into the battlefield, their numbers meant less and less. They were cut down by the arrows, squeezed into a bottleneck, and butchered by the English. In the end, the French lost about 6,000 men, while the English lost only 400. It was one of the most astounding and impressive victories in military history, and would lead Henry V to be recognized as heir to the throne of France years later in 1420. Number 2. The Battle of Ravenna. The Battle of Ravenna was the last battle ever fought by the Roman Empire. It took place in the year 476, after the barbarians had already invaded Rome, ripped out its heart, and plunged the empire into darkness and chaos. Rome was sacked in 410 by the Visigoths, then again in 455 by the Vandals. By the time the Battle of Ravenna commenced in 476, the Roman Empire had lost almost all of its power. The final emperor was Romulus Augustulus, who was not recognized as a legitimate ruler outside of Italy. The Eastern Roman Empire, which would thrive for another 1,000 years, recognized Julius Nepos as the rightful emperor in the West. The fighting took place between Rome and the Herulians. The Herulians were a group of mercenaries who had fought for the Roman army of Italy, but they weren't happy with the way things were going or with their pay. They rebelled against the unrecognized Roman emperor under the leadership of Odoacer. On September 2, 476, the Roman garrison was massacred by the much more motivated mercenaries. The last capital of Rome, the city of Ravenna, was captured. Within hours, 1,200 years of Roman rule was officially finished. Number 1. The Battle of Harran. The Battle of Harran was the first major battle in the aftermath following the First Crusade. It was fought on May 7, 1104, between the forces of the Crusaders in Antioch and the Seljuk Turks. During the First Crusade, the Crusaders had established states in their conquered territories. Antioch was one of these states, as was Edessa. And although these wars were called Crusades, they were really just expansion projects on behalf of the Franks and the Latin Church to conquer all Muslim-held lands. The battle was an absolute disaster for the Crusaders. It was such a big defeat that the Muslim forces were shown just how vulnerable the Crusaders really could be. In the aftermath of the battle, which was brutal and saw the Crusader forces torn apart by the Turks, most of the territory gained in the First Crusade revolted. Antioch was thrown into turmoil. The Muslims regained most of the territory that was lost, and the Second Crusade started shortly after to regain all that lost territory, and all because of one disastrous battle. Thanks for watching. What do you think was the most important battle in history? Let me know in the comments below, and also let me know if you'd like to see a part 2. See you next time. Bye!